Telltale's The Walking Dead is one of, if not the best Walking Dead games out there, certainly better than whatever the hell The Walking Dead Destinies was. I love The Walking Dead as a whole. I think it was either the show or the Telltale game that first introduced me to this universe that eventually turned into gunshots drowning out every sound. I've always had a little fascination for cut content in video games, whether that be the cut story expansions in GTA 5 that eventually turned into GTA Online updates, and the Dead Island cut content that I covered in a previous video. Go watch that after this one. And also join my Discord server and follow me on Instagram for updates on future videos and my inconsistent art posting. But today, I'll be talking about the cut content from Telltale's The Walking Dead. So enough yapping and let's get into the flesh of The Walking Dead cut content. Alright, first off, let me get the more well-known things out of the way first, such as the dream sequences from, I think was episode 3, where either Carly or Doug would talk to Lee in his dream after they had died, or they press him about killing the man that his wife had an affair with. And honestly, reasonable crash out. In this sequence, Carly or Doug will then put a gun up to their head and ask this.
Dead girl walking. What are you looking for, Lee? Second chances? I'll give you another chance. Can you save me this time?
No, she's as good as dead. Dead girl walking. I'll give you a second chance, Lee. Can you save me?
Next thing is the alternate Mark death, with David, the guy who got stuck in the bear trap earlier, being the guy the cannibals used as food.
Fuck! What the hell?
Mark's alternate death would have had him get shot in the head by the bandits, and honestly, I'm glad we got what we got in the final game. It just makes the ending sequence so much more fucked up because it's someone we actually know. And although we didn't get Mark for long, he was still a pretty cool character in general. Okay, so now that we got those out of the way, let's look into the more obscure cut content, such as the morgue. From what I've read up on, it was a place where the developers tested how the game would both play and feel like. Now, the actual place is nowhere in the files. You can't code it into the game, and you can't walk around in it. But the textures to this morgue are still in the game files, but are used for different things, and we know that because the actual textures themselves have morgue in the name. I'll be showing them on screen now. Now, I actually found some full renders of this environment itself, with a dev, Jonathan Banks, describing it. Let me read it to you. The morgue was the first production art created for the Walking Dead game. The environment defined the visual art style and used extensively during pre-production for prototyping gameplay. Now, in the actual game, there is a morgue where we meet the balding old guy, but frankly, comparing the morgue in the final game to the testing one, they look nothing alike one another. Also, fun fact, there are a lot of first-person scenes in the first episode. Now, correct me if I'm wrong, but I'm pretty sure this is a sign that Telltale's The Walking Dead was supposed to be a first-person game. And I'm honestly glad the devs decided to make it the way it is today, simply due to a more cinematic feel to it, and I really like that. Next thing I'll discuss has something to do with the underpass scene, where you meet Omid and Krista. When Omid cuts the tanker off and it falls down, it was originally going to still be in the way and you'd have to move it with a truck, which to my knowledge isn't used anywhere else in the game. There is also this concept art I found that takes place at night, so I'm assuming this whole scene was supposed to be a whole lot more longer and take up more time in the episode, and honestly this part in and of itself is boring enough, so I'm glad they took that all out. Let's also then talk about some more unused textures, most of them being in episode 2, being a sort of archive as In Cold Blood puts it. That channel is also where I got most of this information from for this video, so thanks to them, go check them out. Anyway, the cut textures can include different images such as one of what seems like an early rendition of the drugstore, a weird texture of a house, and my favorite one being the absolute baked image of the game over screen from Plants vs. Zombies, which is just a lawsuit waiting to happen. Oh, and don't get me started on the extremely thin concept art, which is all actual concepts for the different episodes when you go to select them. Episode 2 is having Lee and Kenny look straight out of one of my YouTube videos when I use a stock image. Now, the final thing I'll like to put here is the unused dinner scene, where instead of finding out pretty much immediately, Lee has a sneaking suspicion while at dinner, and tries to postpone the inevitable of Clementine eating food. In this scene, Lee would try to do things such as putting extra salt and pepper on it, as well as cutting it up for her more. This would also get the others mad at Lee, and eventually Lee would have to go wash his hands, thus finding the body of Mark after he got turned into Lieutenant Dan from Forrest Gump. All that's left now is unused voice lines, but I don't really feel like jamming this video with 3 minutes of voice lines, so if you're interested in those as well as other cut content from Season 1 and the other seasons that I really did not think was interesting enough for this video, I linked down in the description In Cold Blood's video, which is also where I got most of the information for this video. Now that's it for Season 1. Now I'll be handing the torch to my brother, Ethan Neko DLC, who I've had along in previous videos. So, now on to him.
Hello. Wasn't expecting me to be here, huh? Me neither, frankly. I've been brought onto here by my brother to talk about the cut content of Telltale's The Walking Dead Season 2. Now, what am I going to be talking about in this section? Well, I'm going to be talking about cut animations, cut characters, some of the cut story, but best of all, the cut ending. A lot of what I'm covering has used a lot of a playlist made by In Cold Blood as a reference. In Cold Blood goes into way greater detail than I ever can, and I highly advise checking him out after watching this video. Now, enough teasing and edging everyone about what I'm gonna talk about. Feed your dog some beans, get your stitches ready. I am Ethan Neko DLC, and let's dive into the insanity of The Walking Dead Season 2's cut content. Let's start with some cut title cards. With everything I'll be covering, I'm gonna cover everything in chronological order. Starting with All That Remains, then moving on to A House Divided, In Harm's Way, Amid the Ruins, and ending with Better to Sleep. I mean, no going back. However, for these title cards, I'm only going to talk about episodes 4 and 5, since in my opinion, those are the more interesting cut titles. Now, episode 4 has a lot of variations. There is the very original one where the blood on Clementine's face is a brighter red, Kenny can be seen in the background, and Clementine herself is facing forward. Then there's a variation where Kenny's silhouette is replaced with Vincent, one where Clementine's is at a whole different angle, and then the final one that we got. Episode 5's cut title was also different. Not only was it named Better to Sleep, but... oh. We'll get back to episode 5. Let's talk about some of the cut animations and what they could have meant for the story. Or at least what I've read on my own interpretation. Starting with episode 1, we have a canoe. Now, we do have the canoe in the finished game, but it's only something we can look at and inspect. We can't really do much with it. However, there is an animation in the game of Clementine placing the canoe on the shore. Now, while there isn't much, if any, information about this canoe online, I believe the canoe would have been used either later in episode 1, or I think it would have been found by Clem and Krista, leading to Clementine having to escape the hooligans in the woods using the canoe. I wasn't there developing the game. I wouldn't know. But I can only assume another thing that was cut had to do with going uphill or downhill. The event takes place in a forest, the same one Clem ends up at after waking up from being dragged by the water current she fell into. By default in the finished game, you are set to go downhill. However, there's an entire cut scene where she would be going uphill. Going uphill, Clementine will have encountered a landslide where she would attempt to climb it, but she would end up falling and tumbling down the hill, kind of forcing her downhill. What's interesting about this is that her iconic hat comes off, and for what would have been up until the encounter with the dog, her hat is missing. That isn't the end of these cutscenes in episode 1, however. There's another cutscene with the dog in particular, actually, which also explains Clementine's hat because... well, the dog has Clementine's hat. Clementine would have to wrestle the dog for her hat back, and she would assumedly get her hat back after some wrestling. There are some cut lines of dialogue of Clementine talking to the dog about being hungry. However, the dog would have already had food. The food, however, a maggot-infested corpse of a rabbit. Yucky! This does make the whole situation of the dog biting Clementine a bit more concerning, however. There is one last scrapped event of episode 1, that being a fishing scene. The fishing scene would have included Clem, obviously, but also Luke and Alvin. Wrong Alvin. There you go. 3 would have been fishing, obviously. There isn't a lot of finished animations for this, but one of Clementine opening a cooler is sort of finished, but not really. Though it can be assumed that Clementine would have been putting fish in the cooler after catching them. There isn't much else for this scene or episode aside from that, so moving on to... Episode 2 doesn't have a lot of notable cut content. There are animations of Rebecca in a cut bathroom, speculated to be where she would have given birth to AJ, but of course that never happened. There's also scrap dialogue from Bonnie and Carver, but listening to it, there really isn't anything notable. It's disappointing, but a lot of the cut content from the next episodes is gonna be short and disappointing, so let's get it out the way and talk about
5, 4, 0.
In the files, there is a model for some kind of baby formula. It's unclear if the formula is used and is just off-screen, or if the baby formula is there to take up file space. Maybe it's some kind of TF2 coconut deal. We'll never know. There is a beta version of Carver, and oh my god, does this dude look hideous. He almost looks like that bum off of the one off-brand Hello Neighbor mobile game. There are unused animations for Shell and Vince holding AKs to the side. Maybe they were supposed to guard House? But besides that, just like episode 2, nothing too interesting. Now for...
Hi, my name is...
Do you like my sword?
I like...
My sword. Do you like my sword, my diamond sword?
Episode 4 probably has the least amount of interesting things cut. The only 3 notable things are a bag Arlo used to carry his medicine, a compass Jane would have gave Clem, and a cut joke Jane tells to Clementine. I'm not going to repeat the joke, but believe me when I say that the joke can easily be found online. Finally, the episode I've been waiting to get into.
내가 살아가기 위해서 누군가의 죽음이
안녕, 난 롤랑이야.
Oh boy. This is gonna be a doozy. No Going Back, or as it used to be called, Better to Sleep, is the last episode of the season. This episode could very well have been the last episode in the whole series, or it would have altered the future of the series, that being Season 3 and the final season. We'll get back to why I say that in a minute, but for now, let's go over the cut events. One cut event that was actually in the game for the first 2 hours on the PlayStation 3 release is Mike's death. Of course, it's unclear what happens to Mike in the finished game, or in the PlayStation 3's case, the patched release. But it's interesting to see that Mike would have died and the event was finished. It would have been much different from what happens in the finished game. Russian guy still shoots Clementine, but the only difference is that Mike would have died. Now, on the final part. In an interview with a couple of devs, they revealed footage of what would have been the end of Better to Sleep. Clementine would have been holding AJ, walking through a blizzard, but what was interesting is that at some point, Clementine would have had the option to die with AJ, or leave AJ to die while Clementine runs off to some lights in the distance. Now, this is important because Seasons 3 and Final would have AJ as a major character. A lot of Season 2 was going to be darker like this. Evident not just in this cut ending, but a lot of the cut story too. Let's talk about that. Now, while there isn't an entire story that I could sit here and yap about for hours on end about, there are a lot of details of what the story could have been. There is a scenario with a nuclear power plant and one about a tiger at a zoo. We don't know much about the power plant, but about the zoo, we do know that Clem and some other survivors would enter the zoo and slowly get picked off by what they thought was a super zombie. But then it was revealed to be a tiger, not named Tony or Oscar, unfortunately. The devs laughed off the idea of a tiger in The Walking Dead. Like, how silly would it be for a tiger to be in a zombie apocalypse? How Oh. Ezekiel exists. Ezekiel has a tiger? Aw, shucks. A lot of Season 2 was supposed to have a Season 3 dynamic going on, but instead of controlling Clem and whoever that guy was from Season 3, It would be Clementine and Krista. Krista, in fact, would have had a lot more screen time than she did. Speaking of Krista, Omid's death wouldn't have been revealed until episode 2, where it would be shown in the flashback. The Wellington ending would have been very different, too. Instead of Clementine and Kenny, it would have been Krista and Clementine, maybe even more survivors, but Kenny would have been dead. Not because of a fight with Jane, but because he would have gotten killed way earlier in Season 2. This never happened, of course. From all I know, the Wellington ending would have been the canon ending, with everyone ending up staying at Wellington after being interviewed. Everyone would be sent to some kind of lower class area where they would be treated like shit, frankly. But Clementine would have had a choice to be in the lower class with everyone else, or take part of the higher class. Of course, the other survivors wanting Clem to choose being in the higher class. Knowing all of this about the story, and truly what could have been, makes me wonder how it would have affected seasons 3 and 4. That's going to be the end of this video. I hope you all enjoyed watching, and I hope you all have an even better week. That being said, wait. This isn't my video.
Alright, I'll take it from here. Thanks to Ethan Neko DLC for coming onto this episode, and go subscribe to him. I definitely recommend his video about how he almost turned into a brony as a kid. And also, make sure to like, comment, and subscribe to keep me in the algorithm, and also go subscribe to Ethan Neko DLC too. And join my Discord server and follow me on Instagram. And have a great day or night, wherever you are. Bye.